Elvis Presley, glamorous, magnetic, seemingly untouchable. But what if I told you that beneath all the glitter and spotlight, there was a single night when one unexpected encounter shattered that image completely? Just a few careless words from a stranger, spoken in the most ordinary of places, cut so deep they brought the king of rock and roll to tears. You won't believe what was said or how he responded. This isn't the Elvis you've seen in concert footage or glossy magazines. This is the man behind the myth, vulnerable, shaken, and heartbreakingly human. Elvis Presley had a ritual most people never knew about, one that offered him a rare glimpse of peace in a life constantly surrounded by chaos. Late at night, when the crowds had thinned and the city had gone quiet, he would rent out entire movie theaters, most notably the Memphian Theater in Memphis. This wasn't a grand spectacle or an ego-driven move. It was deeply personal. For Elvis, the flickering screen and dark velvet seats weren't just for entertainment. They were an escape. In those dimly lit rows, he could sit back, unwind, laugh at a comedy or get lost in a drama, all without the blinding gaze of cameras or the suffocating pressure of fame. The Memphian became his sanctuary, a safe space carved out of a world that rarely offered him shelter. Surrounded by his inner circle, girlfriends and family, he'd find moments of normalcy, even joy. There was no need to perform, no fans begging for autographs, no tabloid rumors waiting to be spun. Just popcorn, whispered jokes, and a sense of stillness he couldn't find anywhere else. In those hours, Elvis wasn't the king. He was simply a man who loved movies, who wanted to laugh without judgment, and who craved the simple pleasure of being left alone. But even in these carefully guarded pockets of privacy, pain sometimes found a way in. Because no matter how many theaters he rented or how many walls he built around his heart, Elvis Presley wasn't immune. Fame might have made him a legend, but it never made him invincible. And on one particular night at the Memphian, something happened. Something so unexpected, so deeply cutting, that it pierced straight through his carefully constructed world. In the whirlwind of Elvis Presley's larger-than-life existence, very few people ever truly knew the man behind the music. But Billy Smith did. He wasn't just a cousin, he was a constant, someone who grew up alongside Elvis, witnessed his rise firsthand, and stood beside him during both the spotlight and the shadows. His wife, Jo, was no different. Together, they became trusted members of Elvis's tight-knit inner circle, affectionately known as the Memphis Mafia. These weren't just bodyguards or assistants. They were family, confidants, the kind of people who didn't just watch history happen, they lived it alongside him. Billy and Jo were there in the quiet moments, in the laughter-filled late-night chats at Graceland, and during those rare glimpses when Elvis dropped the crown and became simply E. They saw him at his highest and, more crucially, at his most human. For decades, they've carried the weight of those memories, choosing carefully which stories to share and which ones to keep locked away. Their bond with Elvis wasn't transactional. It was built on loyalty, love, and the kind of trust that only years of shared life can create. And now, for the first time, Billy is pulling back the curtain on a moment he's never spoken of publicly. It's raw, unfiltered, and unlike anything we've heard before. Not a tale from the tabloids or a headline recycled for drama, but a personal account from someone who was right there, watching it unfold with his own eyes. The kind of story that changes how you see a legend forever, if you're ready to hear it. It started as a simple, familiar moment. Elvis had stepped out from the cozy darkness of the theater, walking toward the concession stand for a quick break. Maybe it was for popcorn, maybe just a stretch, something routine and harmless. The dim lights flickered against the walls of the nearly empty lobby as he moved with that signature grace, but a little slower now, a little more subdued than the public might imagine. He wasn't wearing rhinestones or flashing a smile for cameras. This was the Private Elvis, reserved, quiet, just enjoying an evening among trusted faces. Then from across the counter, a voice cut through the calm like a blade. Sharp, bitter, unexpected. An older woman, standing nearby with an air of indignation, turned to confront him. Her tone was biting, full of sarcasm and accusation, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. And instead of awe or kindness, what most people gave when standing face to face with Elvis Presley. She came at him with something else entirely: resentment, judgment, as if he owed her something more than just a hello. "You give everybody cars," she sneered, loud enough to echo across the room. "But you can't pay my daughter?" The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. It was jarring. Elvis blinked, clearly caught off guard. The people around him, those who knew him best, tensed immediately. No one expected this. Not here, not in a space he thought was safe, and certainly not from a stranger who clearly had no idea what really went on behind the scenes. But Elvis didn't bite back. He didn't snap or raise his voice. Instead, with quiet dignity, he offered an apology. Not defensive, not dismissive, genuinely sorry if something had somehow gone wrong. He even asked a member of his team to look into it, to make things right. His calm, his grace in the face of that disrespect, made the moment all the more heartbreaking. Because you could see it. He was trying to keep the peace, trying to stay composed, even as something inside him began to quietly unravel. What should have ended with a quiet apology and a respectful nod took a sharp, ugly turn. Elvis, ever the gentleman, had already said he was sorry, not once but twice. He'd asked one of his team members to handle the situation, to make sure everything was taken care of properly. But the woman wasn't finished. Her words didn't ease. They escalated. With each breath, her voice grew sharper, more bitter, like she wasn't just trying to be heard, she wanted to cut, and she wasn't letting up, not even for a second. The theater staff stood frozen. The Memphis Mafia stayed silent. The tension was thick enough to choke on. She looked Elvis square in the eye, narrowed hers, and threw out the one insult that changed everything. "You're not very nice," she spat. Then came the real blow. 5 small words that hit harder than any punch. "In fact, you're fat." The room seemed to go completely still in that moment. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of it, like the world itself paused just long enough for the cruelty of that sentence to land. Full force. No shouting, no retaliation. Just a brutal, cold truth Elvis had likely feared hearing aloud. And then you could see it, the change in him, the flash of pain that crossed his face in a split second. The sparkle in his eyes dimmed, his posture stiffened, and the color drained right from his skin. He stood there, completely still, his expression blank, except for the faintest trace of heartbreak. For a man who had commanded stadiums and stunned millions, this one moment from one stranger somehow managed to cut him deeper than any tabloid ever could. But he didn't raise his voice. He didn't push back or put her in her place. Instead, he did something far more powerful. He drew a quiet breath, looked at her with calm sadness, and said softly, "I'm sorry you feel this way, but I can't listen to this." Then he turned and walked away, not out of defeat, but out of dignity. He chose peace over pride, grace over vengeance. And with each step he took toward the exit, you could almost feel the heartbreak trailing behind him, heavy and unspoken. As soon as the theater doors closed behind them and the car pulled away, the silence inside was deafening. Elvis sat there, shoulders hunched, head low, the weight of that moment pressing down on him like 1,000 pounds. The man who had sung for presidents and dazzled millions now looked utterly defeated, his voice barely more than a whisper as he asked over and over again, "What did I do?" There was no anger in his tone, just disbelief, pure, aching confusion. He wasn't trying to defend himself. He genuinely couldn't understand how someone could treat him that way in a space he thought was safe. And the tears, real, unhidden tears, began to roll down his face, catching the light from the passing street lamps as the car moved quietly through Memphis. Then, in a moment that left even those closest to him stunned, Elvis said something that no one expected. Through the sorrow, through the sting of the insult, he turned to Billy and said he wanted to give the woman's daughter a car, a yellow Cadillac no less. Not out of guilt, not for show, but because, in some inexplicable way, he still wanted to turn pain into generosity. That was Elvis. Even when he was hurt, his instinct wasn't to hit back, it was to give. And in that moment, it wasn't about fame or money. It was about trying to make peace in a world that had just shown him how cruel it could be. Billy, though, couldn't hold back. His voice firm, protective, and laced with disbelief, he told Elvis flat out, "Not in your lifetime or mine. She don't deserve nothing." It wasn't about spite. It was about standing up for someone who couldn't see clearly through his own heartbreak. Billy knew that if Elvis followed through, it would be seen not as kindness, but as submission to someone who didn't earn it. And maybe, just maybe, this was one of those moments where Elvis needed someone else to protect him, not from the world, but from his own endlessly giving heart. Back at Graceland, the energy shifted. Elvis had returned to the one place in the world that felt like his own, but peace didn't come easily. He was still carrying the sting of those words, still trying to make sense of the moment that had unraveled so quickly. Upstairs in his room, he paced, back and forth over and over, his footsteps heavy on the carpeted floor. He muttered to himself, his voice rising and falling with frustration. The self-criticism spilled out, not loud or theatrical, but raw. "Why didn't I say something better? Why didn't I shut her down?" he kept asking. It was a swirl of regret and disbelief, as if he couldn't reconcile what had happened with the version of reality he thought he'd built around him. Then, as if pulled out of his own storm by instinct, he paused, caught his reflection in the mirror behind the bed. For a moment, there was silence. He stared at himself, not the stage persona, not the icon, but the man. And in classic Elvis fashion, with a half smirk creeping onto his face, he broke the tension with a perfectly timed jab at himself. "Damn," he said, eyebrows raised just slightly. "I'm a good-looking son of a butch." The room cracked. Laughter erupted from those around him. Linda, Billy, Joe. The heaviness lifted for a beat, and the tension finally let go. That one line, half joke, half truth, was all it took to crack through the wall of hurt. It wasn't just the joke that saved the night. It was the love in the room. The people closest to Elvis weren't just there to laugh with him. They were there to catch him when he stumbled. They didn't try to fix everything or sweep the moment under the rug. They let him be angry, let him hurt, and then slowly helped him rise from it. That moment, that laughter, that warm circle of loyalty, it reminded him that no matter how cruel the world could be, he was never truly alone. And sometimes the real healing didn't come from revenge or closure. It came from the comfort of being seen, flaws and all, and still being loved. What happened that night at the theater wasn't just a clash of words. It was something far more personal. The woman's insult, cruel as it was, didn't simply sting his pride or rattle his ego. It reached deeper than that. It hit a part of Elvis that the world rarely got to see. The part that wrestled with self-doubt, that questioned his worth beyond the fame and fortune. To most, the jab might have seemed like a cheap shot about appearance. But to Elvis, it echoed something more painful, something that had lingered quietly beneath the surface for years. It wasn't about vanity, it was about identity. For all his legend and legacy, Elvis wasn't invincible. Not really. He was a man who, despite being adored by millions, still craved the kind of kindness most people take for granted. He didn't want praise. He wanted peace. And that night, in a space that was supposed to feel safe, he found himself misunderstood in the worst way. The woman didn't just see a celebrity, she saw a target. And in doing so, she unknowingly stripped away the illusion of armor he wore in public. In truth, Elvis was more vulnerable than anyone could have guessed, even when surrounded by those who loved him most. This wasn't some scandal splashed across tabloids. It wasn't a fall from grace headline crafted to sell stories. It was a raw, human moment. One of those rare times when the curtain lifted and the man behind the myth stood exposed. A reminder that even icons break, that sometimes the strongest people are just waiting for the world to treat them gently. And in that brief, bruising encounter, the world didn't. If this moment moved you, or even made you see Elvis in a different light, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There are so many more untold stories, raw moments, and rare glimpses into the lives of legends just waiting to be shared. Like the video if it resonated with you and drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone's vulnerability truly changed how you saw them? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you think someone else needs to see this side of Elvis, share this video with them too.